point number 10, most common logical fallacies that you will come across. Number 10 is the false equivocation. The false equivocation. What does that mean? This is claiming that two things are not equal in order, or wait, two things, excuse me, claiming that two things that are not equal are equal in order to make a point. All right, so let me give you an example of a false equivocation. Basically, you're saying these two things are pretty much the same, and that proves my point, but they're not the same, so it doesn't prove your point. So my background, for example, is in professional sports. I played pro sports for nearly a decade. And let's say I'm talking to some guy whose basketball career ended in high school. He went and played up through his 12th grade year, but he didn't play in college, he didn't play pro. And he and I are having a conversation about basketball, not necessarily our personal careers, just about basketball in general. He says something like, well, Dre, neither you nor I played in the NBA, so it doesn't matter who has a longer basketball resume, because neither one of us played for the Lakers or the Knicks. This is a false equivocation, because there is a difference, mofo, between what I did and what you did. If your career ended in high school, mine ended at the pros, there is a difference. So don't try to equate them. So what he's doing is saying, well, neither of us played in the NBA, so that means we're pretty much the same. No, we're not. It's like saying if someone is at level 8 of the promotion stack in your company, and there's 10 levels of promotion, and you are at level 2, you say, well, neither one of us is at level 10, so we're pretty much the same. No, you're not the same, because there's a level 8 and there's a level 2. All right, there's a reason why those levels have numbers, all right, because everybody ain't the same. People will often use the false equivocation to dismiss or cancel out a point that they don't want to deal with so that they can focus on something else. You can see this in, for example, when people are talking about politics and someone says they're going to vote for candidate A and you're going to vote for candidate B, and you ask them a question about candidate A and they say, well, and they don't really have a good answer to your question about candidate A, because that question is kind of one that the candidate can't even answer themselves, let alone can one of their supporters answer. And they say, well, I don't care if I can't answer that question about candidate A, because there's no way in hell I will ever vote for candidate B. All right, that is a false equivocation, because you're not really answering the question. There's a couple other fallacies involved in that too, but you're basically dodging the question by saying, well, I got to pick one or the other, so I'm going to pick that one. I don't care, even if I don't really have a logical answer to that question that you just asked. So people use this again to dismiss or cancel out something that they don't want to deal with. You'll find this one often done by TV reporters, news anchors, even politicians, when they're trying to end a discussion on one subject so that they can shift the conversation to a different subject. So you have to be very aware of the false equivocation, because really smart people use it all the time to change subjects. And as I've told you with many of the points in this series, when it comes to logical fallacies, people who are really good with words and people who are really good at argumentation, they will just stack these fallacies on top of each other, and you won't even realize that they're doing it. And they'll use it basically to talk circles around you and to keep you from ever focusing on the point that you want to focus on. And one of the ways that they do this is, if you just pay attention, you'll catch it. When you ask someone a question, but they respond with a question of their own. Or you make a statement and they respond with a question that has nothing to do with the statement that you made, but it may be tangential, but it has nothing directly to do with it, in order to throw you off the subject, in order to try to undermine you and then put the conversation onto terrain in which they're good. Again, as I mentioned, this guy I was talking to on a Twitter space, I said men should not be participating in women's sports, and he started talking about the difference in the definitions between gender and sex, which again had nothing to do with what I said. I said men shouldn't participate in women's sports. What does that have to do with gender and sex, or at least the definitions of gender and sex? I would say nothing. Is it tangential? Yes, but is the point? No. And he tried to move the conversation to that so that he could let his expertise shine and he could prove, quote unquote, that he knew what he was talking about. So again, these false equivocations are ones that you have to watch out for, because again, people throw these around. Sometimes they don't even know that they're even using a logical fallacy, but they use these again to make a point, score some points with an audience if there happens to be an audience, and to claim superiority in the conversation. So be careful. They will use this on you. Point number 11. Today's topic, once again, is the most common logical fallacies that you will either use or have used against you. Number 11, the appeal to emotion. The appeal to emotion logical fallacy. This is manipulating an emotional response instead of pressing or presenting a valid logical argument. So, for example, if someone is into kids changing their gender or changing their sex, whatever it is, I don't give a damn what it is. Let's say someone's changing, let's call it gender. A kid decides to change their gender. A boy decides that he wants to be a girl, and I say I don't agree with that. And they will say to me, Well, Dre, what are you saying? You don't care about this kid being happy. You rather him kill himself rather than being who he wants to be. That is an appeal to emotion fallacy. Did you catch it? Did you catch the appeal to emotion? The appeal, I said, I don't agree with that because I don't believe a boy can become a girl. Let's say that was my response, which would be my actual response. And a person who is on the other side of the conversation would say, well, Dre, if they can't change their gender, this boy cannot become a girl. He hates who he is right now. That means he's probably going to go commit suicide within the next 7 days if you don't agree with him doing this. So you would rather him kill himself than him to be who he really wants to be. All right, you see what they did there? That's the appeal to emotion because they're appealing to the emotion of, oh, I must be a bad person who wants someone to kill themselves rather than letting them do the thing that they want to do. When the fact of the matter is there are a whole lot of other options besides that. There's also a false binary because they're presenting as if there are only two options, and binary just means two. So a false binary is when you say, well, it's either this or this, when in actuality, it could be 1,000 other things besides just those two things. So a false binary is when you give people only two options, but there are actually many other options. That might be on our list here today, but we'll talk about that. Let me see if it's in here. Or actually, we already did. I think we already did that earlier in this series. We already did the false binary. So anyway, the appeal to emotion. Be careful about this one because the appeal to emotion tends to pull at your, well, not tends to, it does. It tries to pull at your emotions, which are often stronger triggers to action and stronger triggers to response than logic. You want to get someone to respond, you're much more likely to get a response from them when you get them into an emotional state or you make an emotional point rather than when you make a reasonable, rational, and logical point. Now, that can be used positively, it can be used negatively. So you have to be careful, again, of how people use this because people will use this on you all day and every day. They're going to keep trying. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, but you got to be aware of it so you're not getting manipulated. So I talked about this in the episode where I talked about the satanic attack on language. And in that episode, I explained, that was episode number 2605, how people are manipulating verbiage and changing the phrasing of certain terms to make things sound better than they actually are. Gender affirming care is a form of a satanic attack on language because that's not what it is. If we called it what it is, which is child mutilation, it would not be nearly as accepted as it is right now. When they say a woman's right to, what do they say? Reproductive freedom is what they call it, right? Reproductive freedom. And I know there are women who listen to this who are all about what goes under the umbrella of reproductive freedom. But if we called it what it actually is, which is abortion, which is you voluntarily killing a baby that you voluntarily created 99% of the time. If we called it that, then people would not be in such favor of it and people wouldn't be throwing the term around as much if we called it what it is, which is abortion. Abortion means you are aborting a life that you have started. You started that life voluntarily by laying down and having intercourse with unprotected reproductive organs between you and the man. That's how you got pregnant. So if we called it that, then people wouldn't be so excited to talk about it, right? But see, when you give it a flowery term, now all of a sudden it seems like, well, who would be against a woman's right to choose? Well, let's call it what it actually is, which is a woman aborting a life that she created with a man. All right, so it's not just the woman, and it's not just about the woman's body. It's about the life inside of that body, and it got in there by a voluntary action that the woman took. Well, we can't ignore that part. You see, this is what we call lying by omission. You see, when I put all the context in there, it sounds a whole lot different than what it sounds like on TV or on the internet. All right, so this is why, again, you got to be careful with people in their word games and their language games. And again, people who are highly educated. When I say highly educated, I don't necessarily mean they're very intelligent. I just mean they're highly educated. I mean, they've taken a lot of school classes and gotten a lot of degrees, etc. These people tend to be the ones who most push this stuff. So be very careful when you're around these individuals because they are professionals at doing this and they will manipulate you out of your mind if you allow them to. So be careful of this appeal to emotion. And they, again, as I said, they stack these fallacies on top of one another. So they might use 2 or 3 fallacies in one sentence. And if you're not good at dissecting it, then they'll get you too. They might already got some of you on this already. So now people are throwing things around. As I said, gender affirming care instead of calling it child mutilation. See, if we were calling it child mutilation, there wouldn't be so much support for it. People wouldn't even want to talk about it. Remember that human beings make most of their decisions based on emotion, then they come up with logical justifications for the decision that they've already made. So when someone tries to appeal to your emotions, rather than logically explaining to you what is happening, you got to be on the lookout for them manipulating you. Doesn't mean that they're always manipulating, but this is a framework for manipulating. Again, doesn't mean every time somebody does X that they're going to manipulate you Y, but just every time that you do get manipulated Y, X preceded it. But it doesn't mean every time you see X, you're going to see Y. But every time you do see Y, you see X. So it doesn't mean that they're doing anything nefarious necessarily, but it could mean that they are. So again, you just got to be on the lookout for the tells of these things. Next one, number 12. We are talking again today about, since the last one in our series, the common logical fallacies that get used against you. Number 12 is the Tu Quoque Fallacy. What is a Tu Quoque Fallacy? This is dismissing someone's point by pointing the finger back at them. So instead of addressing the point that a person made, you start addressing the person and who they are and turn the tables to point out something about them to deflect from the fact that they just pointed out something about you. For example, if you're a sports coach and you call out one of your players because at halftime of the game, you say to them, hey, you are not playing hard on defense. The player responds by saying, hey, coach, you used to play and I used to watch you when you played and you didn't play hard on defense either. But maybe that player is correct by pointing out that you did not play hard on defense when you were a player. But what the hell does that have to do with the fact that the player is not playing hard on defense right now, today, in the game? Exactly. It has nothing to do with it. That is the Tu Quoque Fallacy. That is when you point the finger back at the other person and tell them that you are saying something about me, but I can say something about you just as well. Problem with this is the original point never gets addressed. So again, be very careful. Politicians, there's another group that does this all the time. You ask the Republican a question that they don't want to answer, they will flip the script by saying, well, you know what? Look at what my opponent's doing. Look at this. Look at what they said over here. Look what they're doing over there. Look how terrible things are for their constituents in this space right here. And notice that the Republican never actually answered the question. All they did was point the finger at their opponent and change the subject to something else. And again, if you do this artfully enough and you point out the right thing in another person, you will get them to lose their train of thought, and get them off the scent of where they were going, which might have been not useful for you, get them on the scent of something else, which is useful for you, because you get to choose the topic by using the Tu Quoque Fallacy. And the challenge for this, all of you listening to this, you got to be very careful of the Tu Quoque, because it is a direct attack on you personally. Often that's what it is. It's a direct attack on you on a personal level, and it's very hard for most people to ignore that or to turn the other cheek from that or to stay in their frame when they are being personally attacked and keep the focus on the subject. Many people can't do that. Many people don't have this ability. So while it may be true, whatever another person says while turning the tables on you, what they said has nothing to do with the fact that they have basically tried to put you into a defensive position. So you got to be wary of it and don't fall for the bait. I made a few posts on social media where I ridiculed and criticized Kamala Harris, for example, to give you an example of how this works. I made some posts on social media talking about, at the time of this recording, still Vice President Harris. I'm recording this before the election, so who knows what the outcome is. Every time I've done so, and I launched some type of attack on Kamala Harris, not necessarily on her personally, but on something that she did or something that she said or my opinion of her, a bunch of people who are supportive of Harris or supportive of the Democratic Party, or they just hate Donald Trump, and it doesn't matter, all pretty much the same group. They all responded not by defending anything about Kamala Harris. I put up several posts where I said something about her, and most of the responses that went against me, the pushback, was not anybody defending Kamala Harris. But you know what they did instead? They just attacked Donald Trump. That's the Tu Quoque Fallacy. And I even noted that. I said, I noticed everybody here who's defending, quote unquote, defending Kamala isn't really saying anything about her. They're just talking about Donald Trump. You're changing the subject by talking about Donald Trump because you can't really defend anything that I said about Kamala Harris. So again, people will say things like, how can you criticize Harris when the only other option is Trump? All right, that's a Tu Quoque Fallacy. So this one is a slippery one as well, as I've already told you, because this fallacy turns the tables and points a finger at you on a personal level, and this often triggers a defensive reaction from the person to whom it is used, the person on whom it is used, especially if that thing being said is completely untrue, or maybe there's a little bit of truth to it. So at that point, the conversation turns into you defending yourself rather than you getting an addressing of the topic at hand that you brought up in the first place. So again, be careful of this, because people who are very manipulative will use this one to basically turn the tables and get you into defensive mode when you actually just had them on the cusp of being defensive themselves. So they'll throw this out there as a last resort. Maybe this will work to change the subject. So you got to be thick-skinned enough to notice when someone is doing this and don't take the bait of going into defending yourself or attacking them back on a personal level, because again, now you lost the plot and you forgot what the actual point was supposed to be to begin with. With all this said, let's recap today's class, which is the false, or not the false, but the most common logical fallacies, picking up on point number 10, which is the false equivocation. This is claiming that two things that are not equal aren't equal in order to make a different point. It's like someone said, I played in high school, you played in college, neither of us played at the pros, so that means we're pretty much equal. That is not true. Number 11, the appeal to emotion, manipulating an emotional response instead of presenting a valid logical argument. So again, you don't want this kid to get their gender affirming care they need, so you'd rather that they kill themselves. That's also a false binary. You're presenting two options as if they're the only two, and you're also trying to manipulate the conversation emotionally by saying you want this person to kill themselves rather than just saying, hey, there are other options besides doing this and besides killing themselves. There are other things that they could possibly do. And that's the appeal to emotion. That one gets used often. It gets used a whole lot by human beings because human beings are much more emotional than we are logical. Number 12, tu quoque. This is dismissing someone's point by pointing the finger back at them. It's like a sports coach saying, you're not playing hard on defense, and you saying to the coach, well, coach, when you play, you didn't play hard on defense either, so I guess it's okay. False. All right, tu quoque fallacy is really about is a deflection to take the spotlight off of yourself and put it on someone else. And when people fall for the tu quoque fallacy, you lose the plot of the point that you were trying to get to in the first place. So you got to be careful of this one because people will use it against you forever if they realize that it works. Often when it comes to attacking your ego in some way. So you got to be thick-skinned enough to let people say what they're going to say, but not bite on every hook that they throw into the water, so to speak. All that said, workonyourgameuniversity.com. That's the place you get access to all of my trainings, all of my courses, all of our deepest stuff, all of our masterclasses organized by topic. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com to get started. Work on your game. Dre all